It's the episode that was years in the making. Dave has finally read Hoxpox, and I have finally read the Thrawn Trilogy. The most overdue homework assignment is at last submitted. The Byword begins now. Welcome to the Nerd Byword, the only nerd podcast with both a mutant X gene and force sensitivity. Dave and I are here once more to bleed our work life into our pod life with a long-awaited, eternally teased episode in which Dave has read all of Jonathan Hickman's House of X Powers of 10, affectionately known as Hoxpox, and I have finally finished all three novels in Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire trilogy, perhaps better known as the Thrawn Trilogy. But before we transition to today's Byword Big Talk, it is time for... Nerd News! Dave, I do believe you must be like our labor reporter at this point.
I just deeply care about, people. And equally important, I care deeply about the business of comic books. I want it to thrive and do well, because if it doesn't, that means we get less. And what's going on in the digital space, thanks to Amazon, is kind of it's kind of a pisser, to be honest with you, Chris. So back in January, we heard that as part of Amazon's plan to cut 18,000 positions, a number of Comixology staffers were laid off. The memo was actually leaked to Twitter, and Comixology program manager Scott McGovern got on Twitter as well and said, "Can confirm there have been numerous cuts at Comixology this morning, myself included." Now, the thing, of course, here is that we have numerous problems already to begin with. Because Amazon acquired Comixology and put their own stamp on it by, number one, integrating it with the Kindle store to some extent, which has been a huge pain in the butt for many. And then in addition, there's been the problem of the app becoming actually worse and losing functionality thanks to this integration. And then the additional problem of not being able to make purchases, particularly on iOS, through the app. Because any purchase made through the app, Apple gets a cut off of, and Amazon doesn't feel like sharing. So it has become very unwieldy even to purchase comic books on Comixology. And this has been really a leader in the space, with, by all reports, people working on this Comixology project that really, truly, loved comic books and wanted to create the best possible experience. And the whole company has been kind of slowly run into the ground by Amazon. And this is not, good news for comic book fans in any way, shape, or form, but especially if you are a fan of digital comics. Obviously, on the DC and Marvel space, we have, DC Universe Infinite and Marvel Unlimited. But a lot of the more, indie, and I say that in quotes because we're still talking about, companies like Image and Dynamite and IDW, etc. They don't exactly have their own necessarily streaming comic book services. They've been pretty much relying on stuff like Comixology. And that is a revenue stream that is obviously not going very well for them. And this additional money is good for the creators, good for the company to keep comic books alive. Obviously, we need this kind of stuff. And so Comixology going slowly down the toilet over the last couple of years has been incredibly troubling to see. And now, 18,000 positions being cut at Amazon, that's 18,000 people out of a job. That's absolutely awful. And that hitting Comixology as well when, that particular product has slowly been gutted, I guess is the best way to put it, removing functionality and services from it to the point where a lot of comic book fans have been pretty upset with it. It's just not good news for the industry at large, Chris.
Yeah, it's really disheartening to hear because, DC and Marvel are backed by larger corporations, respectively. But, with folks like Boom Studios, IDW, as you mentioned, they really don't. Like, they are solely in the business of comic books. So they don't have like a fail safe, and Comixology, especially behind a large corporation like Amazon, is something that they're going to kind of depend on, especially in this digital age that we live in. It really makes me wonder if something like Global Comics, which we've teased before on our show and use, these little like indie spots will kind of get some business from those larger publishers. It remains to be seen.
The other thing is, of course, that Comixology originals are a thing, right? So there have been exclusive comic books being created for Comixology, and I cannot see that is going to continue in a meaningful way much longer if they're continuing to cut positions and wanting to put less and less money into that part of Amazon's company now. So there's another quote unquote publisher, I guess, another outlet for creatives in the indie space that is either going to be diminished or go away. This is just not a good sign across the board for the digital space. It's akin to something like, I guess, something like Hulu in a lot of ways. You have those shows predominantly like airing on TV, and they're making revenue from it like that, just like comic books are making revenue from printed and going in the stores and stuff. But then that digital space is like that additional revenue stream that oftentimes can keep lower performing books on the shelves a little while longer. So it's extremely troubling when something like that starts slowly disintegrating in front of our eyes. All right, Kris, so let's talk about trailers. You have one that you want to talk about.
Yeah, sure. So Star Wars fans have been waiting with bated breath for a look at the upcoming third season of the hit show Mandalorian. Seemingly a unanimous hit amongst fans worldwide after the mixed reaction and toxic outbursts that the sequel trilogy spawned, the Pedro Pascal-led series released its first trailer for the third season with a March 1st premiere date. According to The Hollywood Reporter, the trailer garnered a record-breaking 83.5 million views in the first 24 hours, usurping Obi-Wan Kenobi of the high ground with its initial 58 million. Footage details a reunion of Pascal's Din Djarin and Grogu, Baby Yoda for those still struggling with the name change, or reveal, I should say, Grogu's force wielding, and flashes of favorite characters from the previous seasons. The trailer also features a monologue from Mando about the meaning of Mandalorian identity and his plan to visit Mandalore itself, seeking atonement for his transgressions and that pilgrimage. Paul Sun-Hyung Lee's Captain Carson Teva also warns of an ominous force of some sort that may very well be Giancarlo Esposito's Moff Gideon making a return, or, as some fans have wildly speculated, Grand Admiral Thrawn himself, appropriate for today's episode, of course. Oh, we also appear to be revisiting Order 66 for roughly the 66th time. Accompanying the trailer was a list of episode directors, including series alum Rick Famuyiwa, Black Panther cinematographer Rachel Morrison, Minari filmmaker Lee Isaac Chung, Grief Karga himself, Carl Weathers, as a director. This one's exciting. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse's Peter Ramsey. And She Can Do No Wrong. Give her a whole feature Star Wars film, please, for the love of God. Bryce Dallas Howard. Dave, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's fair to say that I think most Star Wars fans are, at least to some extent, excited about the Mandalorian coming back for a third season. I can imagine that the people who didn't check out the Book of Boba Fett are a little confused, considering that they kind of resolved part of that plot line on that show, and suddenly Grogu's back with the Mandalorian, and everybody's like, I thought he left. So I think that's probably one of the weirder moments there. Not everything has to be interconnected. It'd be okay if they would have resolved that in the first couple episodes of this season of The Mandalorian. I don't think the trailer really gave us all that much to go on. So although I'm excited to see a third season, I didn't see, a whole lot of information about how this is going to progress, other than he's going to Mandalore to ask for forgiveness for taking his helmet off, basically. And I think having a catchphrase is nice, but they used "this is the way" 4 times in the course of less than 2 minutes in that trailer. Like, okay, we get it. It's the Mandalorian, and this is the way. We know, okay? It looks good, don't get me wrong, and I don't want to come across or sound like a a sour fan or something. I'm excited for it. I just didn't think that the trailer had anything to really smack me in the face and go, oh, holy crap, I can't wait for this. Like, it's just, it looks like more Mandalorian, which is absolutely a good thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. It reminds me of that viral sound from the guy that does Nathan Fielder, who's like, I hope you're hungry for nothing. And like, because like it doesn't really give a whole lot. It's like, it's very much like playing the hits. Like, you love these characters, here they are again. And you know that you're going to be there March the 1st, so why would we give you a whole bunch? So yeah, I'm right there with you.
And again, like, I want to be clear, it's not that I'm not excited for it. I am. It's a good show. So I'm there for it, and I will be watching. But yeah, the trailer was very meh, as far as trailers go.
All right, that wraps up nerd news for this week's episode. When we come back, our homework is going to be turned in at last. Okay, welcome back to this week's Byword Big Talk. And we've teased it for quite a long time. We may have spilled the beans on some of this, honestly, but here we are. In one of the longest homework episodes ever in the works, Dave gave me the in addition, I have some additional novels as well, but the Heir to the Empire trilogy by Timothy Zahn, he gave those to me to borrow probably about 5 years ago, and I have finally read them. And ever since it dropped in 2019, I think it was my first ever nerd commendation. The X-Men agnostic Dave has read House of X Powers of 10. So we're pulling the same standard questions from our homework episodes. House of X Powers of 10, written by Jonathan Hickman, with art by Pepe Larraz, RB Silva, and Marte Gracia. Dave, what did you like most about what you read?
So first of all, I want to be very clear. X-Men agnostic to a certain extent. I was a fan of the old 90s TV show. Obviously, I read some X-Men comic books back in the 90s as well. What a time period, right? So those iconic Jim Lee designs are seared into my memory. But as far as like modern X-Men comic books, I've been disconnected from that particular world. So I know the basics. I know who Cyclops is. I know who Jubilee is. I know who Storm is. That sort of stuff. But like the deeper mythology, I'm not super familiar with. I did read Morrison's run on a previous homework assignment, I want to say, and so I've got that under my belt.
You did. He Who Shall Not Be Named, Astonishing X-Men. You read Morrison's based off of that.
Yeah, so I've read those two runs. As far as like more modern X-Men comic books, I do want to say up front that apologies.
Hold up. Let me say this. This is your first Jonathan Hickman reading, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And I do want to say up front, big apologies to the X-Men fandom. I don't think every one of my takes is going to land necessarily with longtime X-Men fans, but I think that has a lot to do with the fact that I have been not. And so I know you love this thing, and I want to love it too. Didn't necessarily click with me in every way that I'd hoped. I found stuff to love here, but please don't, social media smite me. That would be appreciated. Thank you. So what did I like most about what I read? It's funny because, on paper, this story hits some of my likes in storytelling, not just in comic books, but generally. There's a time travel component. We have, flash forwards and flashbacks. That sort of multi-timeline storytelling appeals to me. Alternate timelines, that kind of stuff appeals to me a great deal. The art was obviously really, really good. I liked that a great deal. I think that the thing that stood out to me probably the most, though, the thing that clicked with me the most, is also the thing that in my further reading, at least so far, got touched on the least, and that's Moira McTaggart. That whole situation, the power of being reincarnated, restarting your life, and with the knowledge of the previous lives, and then constantly making corrections to it and trying different paths. I found that absolutely fascinating, and the way she uses that power to try to better the situation for mutant kind. Like I thought that was easily the most fascinating component of the story, and I really wanted just more. I don't know. It's been several years, obviously, since this came out, and I read the first 6 issues of each of the follow-up series that launched out of this initial status quo change, I guess. And I didn't see anything really addressed with that, but I would be fascinated even to see a mini series about some of those previous lives and how things went wrong. And I think there's more rich storytelling in that character and in those 10 different lifetimes or whatever that she went through. I find the way the character was presented in this particular story, very rich, very interesting, and full of potential. And I wanted a lot more Moira to come out of this than what I saw, at least in the initial launches for new comic book series out of the status quo. So that by far my favorite and most interesting thing about all this was Moira, her mutant power, and her various lifetimes. I wanted more of that.
I think in a medium where we get so many useless retcons or ones that are, at least on Marvel's side, spawned by film rights issues. We're looking at you, Maximoff family. I think it's probably the most additive retcon, to borrow Ash's term again, the most additive retcon that I've seen in recent memory. I think it just works so seamlessly, even whether you're a newcomer to X-Men comics like yourself, or if you're a long storied, or you binged a bunch of it in recent years like myself. I think it just makes it's so much clicks. Now, to pull back the curtain a little bit, there was a Moira X book that was planned by Hickman himself. That is exactly kind of what you were wanting, but let's bring in the context here, and here's the C word again. This was released in 2019, and COVID and the delays and, all the wheels stopped turning, that delayed and then ultimately canceled that book. And then Hickman ultimately left the X office. And so it was interesting revisiting this myself and kind of seeing how, unfortunately, after Hickman's departure, we've kind of returned to the status quo, if you will, even though, they were still on Krakoa and Arakko and all of that stuff that he established initially. We've still kind of gone back to protecting the world that hates and fears them. And that's a bit disappointing.
Yeah. And I think there's more to unpack there as we go through this discussion. But I think that's probably the thing I like most about this status quo change is not so much the status quo part, but the story part, right? And I feel like a lot of the story is designed to shift the status quo, and I don't think there's necessarily an immediate resolution to some of these strands planned, because then it could potentially upend this new status quo that so many fans are liking. So I'm very interested to see how this story progresses. There's so many dangling plot threads I'm fascinated to see picked up, but because it's a status quo change, more so than a story, I think we might wait years for some of the shifts and some of the resolutions that somebody like me who's really interested in the story might be looking for.
I don't know if you would want to jump right to this initially, but I think you'd be really interested in reading Inferno, which is, after years of publication wise, at least, of of Moira being behind the scenes, kind of hidden out by Charles and Magneto. Like, it's revealed that Moira exists and all this stuff, and everything just burns to the ground, figuratively speaking. And the whole Destiny and Mystique thing, which I'm sure you got some of with those first 6 issues. Some of the best stuff in the Krakoa era is Mystique and Destiny. All of that kind of, and it was Hickman's kind of finale, and it was incredibly satisfying.
Oh, I'll have to take a look at that.
Okay, so what do you think could have been better or just didn't land with you? Here we go. Buckle
Man.
up.
All right. I like I said earlier, I'm really into like wheels within wheels storytelling. I like multiple threads, flash forwards, flashbacks, alternate timelines. All of this stuff really lands with me. I think my real problem with this series and the reason that it took me a couple of different times to get into it is that the House of X stuff worked for me, but every time that we went powers of 10, the pucks in the hocks, so to speak, the first few issues felt very, very disconnected. So we have this flash forward and something is going on in the future, but the context is not revealed until almost all the way at the end of these combined 12 issues. So I felt very ambivalent about every flash forward until I reached the end. And then I was like, oh, that's why this is going on.
Except for Rasputin. Except for Rasputin. You loved her from the word.
Yes. Yes. I guess the thing for me just is that, mystery box storytelling is fun if you give me something to be invested in. And with especially like the 1,000 years in the future flash forward thing, it felt so unrelated and so disconnected from what was going on in the present that every time that they flashed forward, I could not care less. And it felt like a chore to read those sections. And I know that this is a Hickman thing. I've read up a little bit about his storytelling style and everything, and I understand what he was going for. But I think there is a way to have your cake and eat it too with this kind of story by giving me someone or something in that time period to latch onto and to care about. And then all of this will click. I think it's like halfway, maybe like issue 3 or 4 of Powers of 10 before you even see that Moira is there and it's like in stasis and they're trying to do something with giving her that knowledge and then killing her off so she can take that knowledge back in her next lifetime. Like it's like halfway through there, so you have this extensive flash forward basically that feels just like a chore to get through. It feels like dead time. The other thing that didn't land with me quite as well are those info pages. I'm not opposed to like prose inserts and stuff in comic books. I just think the formatting of them did not exactly rivet me, I guess is the best way to put it. This is going to sound odd, but I just very recently read something that does something similar and I thought worked a lot better, and that is the new Star Trek series from IDW. They have datapad entries basically that you see throughout, and they're kind of used for new readers to get context of some of the background of some of the characters, because it is steeped in continuity. You have the return of Ben Sisko from the wormhole. Data works with him from Next Generation. You have Skottie from the original show popping up. Like there's all these different characters across different parts of the franchise. So they use these datapad entries to kind of clarify that. And they do it sometimes really in a playful way that really landed. It didn't feel so much like a chore, like an info download that you have to get through to understand the larger story. One really comes to mind that was like in like a third or fourth issue, Q pops up. And so for readers that don't get who or what Q is, they had a page in the comic book that was a datapad entry of comments from various Star Trek captains that have encountered Q, and it's like Picard, like very dry, like I really can't stand this guy. Janeway, I think the Q are just a deeply lonely people. Like you understand even like the characters, the captains a little bit by how they view Q. And then it gets to Ben Sisko's log entry from that day, and it's like, Q came to Deep Space Nine today. I punched him in the face. And that was the whole entry. And it just perfectly clarifies that character while also introducing to new fans who Q might be, And so I found those like data downloads, I guess, a little more playful, a little more fun, and a little less like homework, I guess. So those are the two things that really stuck out to me. The flash forwards, I had trouble getting invested in until the end, and then those data pages got me a little bit after a while. They just seemed like a lot of work rather than fun, if that makes sense.
Here's the crazy thing. I don't disagree with you. And House of X is far and away, maybe my favorite thing Hickman's ever written. But then Powers of 10, I don't think it's as well executed as some of his other wheels within wheels, to borrow your term, stuff. I'm still a huge fan of his initial Marvel run before he even touched the X books. As a history nerd, you're going to love his Shield book if you ever touch on that. It's like a 6-issue miniseries where like these historical figures like Sir Isaac Newton, Nikola Tesla, like travel through time, and it's super sci-fi with history nerd. Like it's this wonderful blend. Leonardo da Vinci. It's so great. So great. You're going to love that. But so I don't think Powers of X like delivered as much. And I will also say, being such a huge Hickman fan of like reading his complete idea that culminated with Secret Wars, I think 2015 is when his Secret Wars went out, released in 2015. I think he got to tell his whole story, and I meant to mention this in the first part. I think my greatest disappointment with all of this and him leaving is he didn't get to tell that final story, and so like those loose ends are left to be tied up by other authors who have different ideas, and so we never got to see that complete story, and that's the disheartening thing to me. It's funny you say that about the data pages, because subsequent stories, they do kind of do things like that, like you mentioned with Star Trek. And some writers, most if not all X books subsequently have those data pages for one reason or another. Some of them are journal entries that really hit close to home. Vida Ayala did great stuff with their New Mutants run, with like journal entries that really kind of let you get a glimpse inside those characters. I'm thinking specifically of Warpath's Jimmy Proudstar's journal entries that were super emotional and beautiful. And then you have
maybe that's it, Chris. Now that I think about it, maybe it's the dry nature of those entries.
I think it's the initial. I think it's the initial. I think because he does subsequent ones that are good, this is just like the setting it up that don't really establish one. And I don't disagree with you. I agree with you. Powers of 10 does not land with me like House of X does. Dave, what surprised you the most about Hoxpox?
Well, I tried to read it once before and kind of discarded it after a couple of issues because I couldn't get into it. I guess what surprised me the most is that I actually found it, in the end, once I was through the whole thing, incredibly enjoyable. Like I said, the Powers of 10 thing was probably the weakest to flash forwards, but even there's some really big, interesting ideas. Basically the X-Men version of like Borg popping up and wanting to integrate the phalanx, integrate and assimilate, and artificial intelligence, and there's all these really good big ideas as a sci-fi fan that I totally feel. Like I said, the time travel stuff, like all these different elements that are there, I find incredibly enjoyable. I don't think the execution always lands perfectly for me, but I found it much, much more enjoyable than I thought I would, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, that's exactly the analogy. Every time I see the phalanx, I'm like, "Hey, Borg," and I've encountered them. They're a go-to like early '90s villain in X-Men comics, but then also they're inextricably linked with the X books because of Warlock and his connection with the phalanx. But also show up in Guardians of the Galaxy books, and we've talked about both of our struggles to kind of get into those. The initial stuff of Annihilation Conquest was all the phalanx and stuff, and some of that I really, really enjoyed. But yeah, phalanx is one of those things where like I have to just like throw my hands up in the air that I don't understand it to as much as I'd like to.
And I do also want to point out another thing I really liked about it, which gave a sort of ambivalence that I think later books abandoned a little bit. You weren't exactly sure who the good guy and who the bad guy is at the end of this, right? Because the conclusion that Wolverine and Moira there at the end seem to come to in the future is that it's not Nimrod, right? It's not the artificial intelligence. It's not the robots that are the problem. It's humanity that are the problem. And so that feels a little bit like a declaration of war if you think about it. You get this, we're mutants, and the only way that we can survive is if we need to take care of these pesky humans. So, are the X-Men really the hero in their own story here? I enjoyed that ambivalence, I guess is the best way to put it. Like, are they the good guys or not? And leaning into that kind of thing, has the potential for some really interesting storytelling. So I really like that part as well, that you're not quite sure if mutants are quote unquote the good guys or quote unquote the bad guys here.
Yeah, and I think what I was interested in probably the most about House of X was like the kind of like the great replacement theory being brought to the text with Orcus, and like humanity being so threatened by the presence and just the existence of mutants that like, and some of those data pages was like, the mutant population is growing. We're going to enact Orcus protocols just because there are more mutants. And so seeing that brought textually, and like the intersectionality of that was fascinating to see. And, Orcus being constructed of, yes, organizations like Hydra and AIM, which were, historically very adversarial and villainous, but then also having S.H.I.E.L.D. to make up portions of Orcus as well was really interesting and something to play with there. This is always a funny question to ask you when I make you read X-Men comics. What continuity or larger universe issues did you encounter?
I have absolutely no idea who half of these people are. I really had. I got an education, let me tell you. Like the 5 mutants that are involved in like the whole resurrection protocols thing. Mm-hmm. I knew none of them. Moira McTaggart, I had no idea who this person was. So I seem to recall that she was in like X-Men First Class, I think, as a character.
Yeah, but don't pay any attention to that. She's just a random CIA agent and is regular American.
Yeah, so there's that, right? But other than that, I had no idea who this person was. And I think to a certain extent, this was not necessarily a bad thing, because this seems to me like the book has a fresh approach to a lot of these characters and is looking at them through fresh eyes, And so like, I'm not that familiar with, Mr. Sinister or even Apocalypse all that much, right? So seeing then these characters right away through Jonathan Hickman's eyes, I get the feeling that they're a little more complex and a little more multi-layered in this than they were depicted previously, maybe. And so I have no problem necessarily with that. I think I picked up on who these people are and what the context of them is well enough to enjoy the story. But yeah, I mean, that's a whole separate issue. That the X-Men world has become so large and sprawling that it feels borderline almost impossible to know every nook and cranny of it. So you kind of have to just roll with the punches if you're not an X-Men insider when you read something like this.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, the X books are almost their own publishing line. Because you'd be hard pressed to find another like sect of one of the big two that is that like self-inclusive. But yeah, I think for me, this is just personal experience with the advent of the internet and Wikipedia, or like the wiki pages of fandom and stuff like that, I think a lot of that stuff it really helps, because I'll have multiple tabs open, like, okay, give me a quick rundown of Blue Beetle or something if they pop up in a story that I'm reading. It's really helpful. All right, so you've detailed this a bit, but how do you think reading this text is going to change your reading choices going forward?
I think the short version is, at the time I went ahead and I continued on for a little bit, right? I read like I said, about the first 6 or so issues of each series that launched in response to this. And that some of them hit better than others. I really liked Marauders. I like the book that was focused on what is it, Captain Britain. I thought that book really hit well with me. And then the main X-Men title, where you kind of got to see more of like the inner workings of Krakoa and stuff like that. Those kind of hit with me. There were others that didn't quite hit as well with me. But I think the biggest problem is that I still stand, as you said, it's kind of a separate publishing line almost. I still feel a little bit like the guy standing on the outside. I don't know enough of all of these characters to be able to sort of pick and choose the books I want to read. So I kind of take the all-inclusive approach. Like, I'm just going to try everything. And when I do that, I get burned out very, very quickly on X-Men adjacent books. And so I burned out very, very fast in the wake of Hoxpox, and was like, I'm going to have to take a step back from X-Men for a little while again before I try this again, which is a shame because, like I said, there are things there that I really, really enjoy. And the status quo shift that this caused is definitely interesting enough to warrant a whole bunch of different books. So I get, where this is all coming from. It's just as a newer fan, or a fan that is only peripherally aware of some of the X-Men lore, it is very, very difficult to stick with and find an in. If you look, comparatively speaking, at what's going on over at DC Comics right now, for example, with Superman, if I want to follow main continuity Superman stories, I got three books. And that's it. I got Action Comics, Superman, and Adventures of Superman, which is going to be featuring Superman's son, John Kent. And that's it. I can use those 3 books and I can follow Superman. And even at the height of, Superman 90s mania, there were 4, right? And there was one issue a week, and I could follow the entirety of all of Superman's adventures. But when you're looking at a sprawling world like X-Men, and there's so many different characters to service, both major and minor, it's a little much to handle, I guess. So I'm going to continue to try to dip in and out and pick and choose series that I find interesting. But as far as following like the entirety of the line, I don't think that's really feasible for me.
And I don't think that's necessary, because I haven't. There are a number of books. At the onset of it, I was doing the same thing, but that's with my deep passion for it that I've built over the last 30 plus years. But I eventually tapped out on some of those books that just weren't landing with me. I haven't read X-Force in a long time. I haven't read Wolverine solo in a long time. So I kind of pick and choose what I'm interested in, and I think that's one of the kind of the blessings about being a team book like that. You'll have like crossover events inevitably, but like with so many different titles, it's kind of like almost like a menu. You get to pick and choose, and I don't think that like I get the gist of what's going on in those other books, and I don't feel like I've missed out on anything because I'm not reading them.
That's probably fair.
All right, it's time to turn the tables.
Oh man, so
wait, hang on. Before we do that, I meant to ask this. Dave, who's your favorite X adjacent character now?
After all of this?
Moira.
I find Moira by far the most interesting character right now. I just want to know more. I'm sure she's going to end up like being spun into some kind of like antagonist / bad guy. But as far as just being a really fascinating character, as of Hoxpox, I would say I want more of her.
That is the understatement of the century, mein Freund.
Yeah, that makes me sad. Of course, a character that I find interesting is going to right away become the bad guy. Naturally. Maybe that's
revealing something about you. Do you have a villain origin story bubbling at the surface?
Despite my country of origin, I am in fact not fascistic in nature. let's put it that way, okay? Alrighty, so where do we go from here? Other than I'm an old Star Wars Expanded Universe kid, and we're talking about the Heir to the Empire trilogy. We're going to go ahead and have to start right away with a little bit historical context here. This was quite a homework assignment for Chris, and I feel bad about the fact that he used the old audiobook version to discover this because
God, dude. Oh, I feel like I was trapped in the rancor pit. My God.
Yeah. So just to elucidate a little bit, the Heir to the Empire trilogy began publication in 1992. Consists obviously of 3 books, and this is Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command. All 3 books written by Timothy Zahn. These were basically the sequel trilogy before Disney produced a sequel trilogy. These were the first post Return of the Jedi stories that Lucas authorized to be told. and they kicked off a major expanded universe of Star Wars media that told stories within a same continuity, continuing the story from the original trilogy on. So we get lots and lots of stories of Luke Skywalker, and Leia and Han and all of those characters, as well as numerous new characters that were introduced specifically to that sprawling continuity. And then when Disney purchased Star Wars outright for a few $billions, they labeled all of this, extra media that continued the story of these characters legends, and as an alternate continuity, and then instead produced their own sequel trilogy that brought some of these characters back in a very different kind of continuity setting. So my goal here with this homework assignment was to introduce Kris to some of the best that the old expanded universe had to offer. Back in the 90s, when there was no Star Wars content, there was no Mandalorian trailer, there were no TV shows, there were no new movies. It was a complete dead zone of content. This is, the beginning of the expanded universe that gave us stuff like Shadows of the Empire, video games, and all of that good stuff, which took place within the same continuity. So I have a funny feeling that, hindsight is 2020, and Kris is going to tear my beloved Heir to the Empire trilogy a new one. But here we go. I will try to muddle through the pain. Kris, what did you like most about what you read in this trilogy of books?
Mara Jade. Next question. I love her.
She is by far the breakout star of this. Yeah,
and the only thing that I haven't seen in the new canon, that's the only glaring thing that we're lacking, and the only thing that I'm desperately waiting for, because we've gotten Thrawn, and he's probably the breakaway star from all of this, in addition to her. But we could have that clone Jedi that none of us know how to pronounce correctly, Joris Sabaoth, I guess. Sabaoth, who knows? It's such a Star Wars name. I think Mara is the clear star here. And Thrawn is being this cold, calculated villain that really, when you unpack that and being able to create such an adversary that's so compelling and so popular, in the medium of a paperback novel is really something, and it speaks to Zahn's storytelling abilities to build this person, to give them such a great description that you feel chills when you're reading this, or listening to a horrendous 1940s era recording of it. I really did overall enjoy what I read. But Mara Jade, and just and it's funny because like the enemies to lovers trope is so like done to death, but I think it's done well here. And I think a lot of agency and a lot of kind of room to grow, and of like a lot of voice is given to Mara Jade in this book. And I think that's what I enjoyed the most, is like you legitimately get to see the other side of the story, and it's not just like she's bad and the messianic character just made her fall in love. But it's easily Mara is the best part of these books.
And I know you're kind of latching onto like this enemies to lovers trope. What I really, really love about the introduction of this character is that at this point, although they kind of make an uneasy peace, it would be years before they would actually explore this in further books as a potential relationship. In fact, there were rumors going around for a while that she'd be paired off with Lando Calrissian. There was a trilogy of books that came a couple years after this that dealt with Luke falling in love with a woman called Callista. Who that was a whole nother story, by the way. That's pretty complex. And so those two kind of circled each other and were in each other's orbit for a long time, before that actually became a relationship. And I always appreciated that this was really sort of a take your time, slow burn situation. I don't even think necessarily that the publication group or the various authors were clear that that's the direction they were going to take those two characters in until much later. So it never felt tropey to me. Specifically because of that, it kind of had a lot of room to breathe and develop naturally. I always liked that about that.
Yeah, I got definite shades of one of my favorite flirtatious relationships in Star Wars of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Asajj Ventress. So like that was, if we don't get Luke and Mara on screen per se, at least we'll have that.
Yeah, seeing those two on screen would be so deeply satisfying. The thing about Thrawn too, and I wanted to throw this out there since you talked about how he's one of the best things in the book. I love how very different he is from Darth Vader and the Emperor. He's not this cackling lunatic that is like or rules with fear. He's just this incredibly cunning, calculated, cold individual. It's a very, very different villain for Star Wars, and was such a breath of fresh air. At the time that this came out, comparing it to the original trilogy and then getting this. And you got to remember this, this predates the prequels as well. So, this is a completely different feel for Star Wars villainy at this time. It was so unique and really, really awesome. And I still to this day, I adore that character. I think he's just such a great antagonist. All right. So that brings us to what do you think could have been better, Kris?
The audio recording.
I'm so. We should have found that fan audiobook that they produced much sooner in the process.
I found it, but he's only done the first book, and by the time you sent it to me, I was already over halfway done with Dark Force Rising. Yeah, I think my only hang up on Zahn's writing is he does spend a lot of time and energy in the micro details that aren't really appealing to me. Like there are much more compelling things that I want to get back to, like breaking up asteroids. Honey, how long do we need to talk about breaking up rocks? My God. And that boy loves a forest. He loves a forest. Did he write it in a forest? I neglected this one. I need to go back to what I liked most, and I totally forgot about my homies, the Nogri, because, oh my God, that was such a genius plot thread to intertwine throughout the entire trilogy. And then for that to be the final, spoiler alert for a book that's been around 30 years, for that to be like the end of Thrawn is his most trusted, bodyguard is being his end because of this lie that's been unraveled. Oh, I love the Nogri stuff. That may have been right up there with Mara as the best part of the book.
And how strange that we've not seen the Nogri adapted somewhere in Star Wars media, because
we have. You are just agnostic to it because you won't watch Star Wars Rebels. We have Rook.
Nope. I guess I'm gonna have to dig deeper into Rebels.
The plot thickens. And so back to what could have been better. I feel like it was very much of its time, and that's no insult at Timothy Zahn. We grow and we become more aware of how to write characters that are not of our own backgrounds. I found particularly the way that he wrote a lot of female characters, most noticeably Leia, to be very 90s era, like this is how we write women. I felt that she was very kind of put in a box and on a pedestal as like this princess, and I don't feel like she had enough of that kick princess vibes that I wanted to get. Of course she was pregnant, but at the same time, I wanted a little bit more agency from her, but I will chalk that up to the, it being the 90s. I will say that it was annoying. We had a lot of stuff that we kind of like, the joke kind of died with the original trilogy. So making Han sit through those meetings was annoying. And just like, remember Han, he hates this stuff. And it was like, some of it was like playing the hits from the original trilogy. And then I wanted to go past that and making him sit at a table with Mon Mothma, not Mon Mothma. That was another hang up of Coruscant and Mon Mothma. That was deeply disturbing. Also, shout out to my guy General Bell Iblis. Love that dude.
Yeah.
and she was so petty for that. Like, y'all was like kids, and she wouldn't like ask him to go, and it was too late too. Like, we could have saved yourself your pride, and so you and your flowy sleeves can go on somewhere, Mon Mothma.
I actually I actually thought the politics stuff in particular was really fun in here because we hadn't seen it in like the prequels at that point. And I don't think the prequels necessarily did a very good job with the politics stuff. But the complexity here, maybe it's the political science nerd in me. I appreciate it, like trying to deal with enemies that are not your enemies, like they're technically on the same side as you, but they're still antagonists. And how do you deal with that? How do you push forward in a situation like that? I thought that was a nice new wrinkle at the time for Star Wars. And then, the prequels try to do it much less successfully, I think. So.
And I detailed this before, and I'm dancing around a little bit. I'm sorry, but I'm just like remembering.
Oh,
it's 3 novels. It's 3 novels. So I detailed this before, but Borskfalia as an adversary is just such a geniusly well done. I said this on a previous episode. I wanted to beat the crap out of that furry little turd. And so what you mentioned, the politics thing, and that's what made me think of it. And just like that's such another genius scheming plot by Thrawn to plant him on the council. And it's just such a smart thing. Because I really hated that little furball's guts.
Everybody did at the time too. So what surprised you the most about this whole series, Kris?
Probably that I enjoyed it as much as I did. I thought it was going to be a retread of a bunch of old stuff that it didn't really interest me. The fact that I was able to overcome my hatred of the audio recording to enjoy what I read. I had to like multitask and like play some video games while listening just to like get past that. But I really did enjoy it to a great degree. And it just surprised me that like also that Filoni and company have integrated so much of this. And like I said, the only glaring omission thus far, fingers crossed, is Mara, because the rest of the stuff for the most part, Phalia, not so much, but that's okay. We can leave him. But I think Mara is the only one that hasn't been integrated, and fingers crossed that we can get that moving forward.
Any continuity issues you ran into reading this?
I think I detailed this before in a previous episode, but it was just super weird, contextually speaking. Kind of revisiting this when after its release, we had both the prequels and the sequels. And so I kind of had to reorient myself because it was very disorienting. So that was about it. That was probably the only larger issue that I had. I also want to check out these comics too, because that's interesting to me now, and kind of being able to get that visual medium.
I'm fascinated by your situation of coming to this completely divorced from the time period, because it's not like you can delete your knowledge of the prequels and the sequels.
Yes.
And put yourself into 1992, and there's not been any Star Wars in almost 10 years, and suddenly boom, there's this trilogy of novels that continues the story. It's I think a big disconnect, and I'm actually pleasantly surprised that you enjoyed it as much as you did, given that we know so much more now about the Star Wars universe.
Here's the crazy thing too, and maybe this surprised me the most. Again, I'm jumping around, I'm sorry, but some of the things that you're saying is kind of sparking my mind. The thing that really surprised me the most is that most of the stuff can still fit in canon. Like, because we're continuing on with these in-between quills, if you will, with The Mandalorian, but this is the same time period that most of these books take place, if I'm not mistaken, 9 ABY or what, after the Battle of Yavin or whatever. Like, it feels like we can fit. There are some like technical hangups that are like not really consequential, but a lot of the stuff we could still see if Lucasfilm wouldn't be such cowards and just recast Luke Skywalker and the big three.
Yeah, and I mentioned this before. You at most you need a couple of tweaks here and there. Like, oh, you want Leia pregnant? Well, boom, it's it's Ben. Hallelujah. It's instead of the twins. Or you want Mara Jade and Luke to end up being together. Well, then she perished when the whole attack happened on the Jedi Academy there.
I think you said that would piss off Luke and make him the grumpy old curmudgeon, and that would make so much sense.
Yeah. There's much, I think, in the old expanded universe that was really, really good and should survive. And there are plenty of things that were really, really crap. and should never be talked about again. I'm looking at you, Crystal Star, you turd of a book, you. So, anyways, how do you think reading this text will change your reading choices going forward? Or, to put a kind of a different spin on it, could you see yourself revisiting some more old expanded universe stuff to get more of this kind of flavor?
When I have time to read the actual physical medium and not the audiobooks, absolutely. Because I can't do that again. So I immediately, almost to wash my hands clean of it, I went back to the Witcher audiobooks, and it's like a night and day difference. Here's a bonus, because I know this is your very first nerd commendation. Those Witcher audiobooks are like the creme de la creme. Like, that's exactly what that medium was made for. My previous nerd commendation of Wolverine the Long Night, and that return to like the old serial radio program of like the 30s and 40s with these like resplendent with music and sound effects and everything. The fourth book, The Time of Contempt, the Witcher audiobook, and Peter Kenny is like the best in the business as far as like narration and voice acting, in my opinion, as you of course detailed so long ago. But they add those elements to it, like Ciri is running from the wild hunt as she does in the video game, and like you get thunderclaps and lightning and like these creepy sound effects where I'm like turning the lights on in my room as I'm listening to this because it's terrifying. So yeah, as far as to bring it back to the expanded universe, I'm definitely going to check out those comics. I think Dark Horse made those, if I'm not mistaken. And then
Yes.
I'm going to also read some of those other novels that you so generously lent me so many moons ago, when I have actual time to sit down and read them.
Yeah, I have mucho recommendations for you when it comes to the expanded universe. There are corners I would avoid like the plague. They were very disappointing at the time, even. But there are things that are fantastic. I still have mad love, for example, for the first 4 books in the X-Wing series, which take place, focus on minor characters, take place right before the Heir to the Empire trilogy, and are basically the story of how Coruscant was retaken after the fall of the Empire.
It's Coruscant. It's pronounced Coruscant.
Yes. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I need to work on that. But that story of how they, go back to what, the Imperial Center and retake Coruscant is such a good story. It goes over 4 books, and the characters are awesome. The whole thing is really good. I think you'll like it.
Is that air battle stuff?
Yes, but the writing
air battles I check out. So on movies and books, I don't know what it is. Air battles are just not my thing.
I bet you 10 to 1 this will convert you, because Michael Stackpole does an incredible job. Plus, it's not all flying. They also are kind of more like they do like ground attacks and stuff too. But the big point here is, if you like Mara Jade, you'll probably also really like Mirix Tarek, another very strong female character introduced in the novels. I think you like her.
Okay, let's hopscotch again, because I'm jumping right back. My dude Talon Card. My dude. That whole thing with like who was the ship thief guy, that doofus, where they like tried to blackmail him as like, you remember the attack on like the smugglers union meeting or whatever, and they tried to pin it back on Card, and the way that worked out was just chef's kiss. Loved that scene. And they trapped him in it. Oh, it's so good.
I do have to ask one additional question. I have mad love for Luke Skywalker as a character. And I always bemoan the fact that we don't get a lot of Luke in his prime. As far as live action media, we got kind of skipped over all that. So I'm very curious what your take is on Luke in this series. Yeah, you can
overrated.
Kiss my butt.
He's overrated. That's been the Nerd Byword. Yeah, I just... there's only so many messianic characters. Like, I never do wrong. That's why I love The Last Jedi, is be like, it makes sense. Like, you're that like optimistic and like shaky haired, like optimistic guy. And I like Luke the best in Return of the Jedi because he's wearing all black, and it's like, I don't know about this whole like, I'm a Jedi like my father before me. It's just so played out, and it just doesn't appeal to me. Like, he never makes the wrong decision ever. And like that's why I vibe with The Last Jedi.
He makes plenty of wrong decisions in the expanded universe, let me tell you. But I will say this: I think the appeal of Luke Skywalker to me falls in the same ballpark as the appeal of Superman. You know, it's the eternal optimism, the hopefulness, the one character that just won't give up and will keep pushing forward. And I really like his portrayal in this series in particular. I think it works really well.
I guess for me, I don't see. I'm frustrated by his naivete, if you will, and like I guess part of that, as I've grown older, I don't know if I've grown more cynical and stuff, because I was an eternal optimist, and I, in some ways, I still am. It's just like I just need a touch more of pragmatism from him, and I did see that in the third novel finally. And so like the second half, it really picked up in the second half of Dark Force Rising, and I think I enjoyed The Last Command the most of the three. I don't know, that last part of Dark Force Rising was great. The first book, and I detailed this previously, it was a lot of setting up, kind of what you were talking about with Hoxpox, particularly Powers of 10, is like setting up the stuff, and like we will now be telling this story. And so I finally started vibing with him, towards the end of the trilogy. Also, have we not talked about that loony bin? That stuff was great too, like the infighting between Thrawn and Sabaoth. Like that was great. What did I not like? What I think could have been better? Can we get a little bit more creative in naming clones rather than just adding a vowel? Luuke? Really?
Luuke.
And I made this joke to you via text that all too famous scene of Vader saying no is just him looking at all the clones of himself. Like, what is that? Come on.
I will.
I do agree. I do agree with you. You made this point to me in person. The idea of clones not just being stormtroopers. Now, the Clone Wars did a lot of heavy lifting and giving agency and individuality to those clones of Jango Fett, but the idea of clones being psycho Jedis is great. Love that.
Yeah, and that was probably the thing, the prequel perspective on the Clone Wars that I found most interesting is like, imagine you create a Jedi who's a clone and he can't handle being, another presence that it's identical in the Force, and then they like go a little nutty. Like, yeah, that would be a Clone War, right? Can you imagine bad Jedi clones? Like this slaps. Like I'm there for it.
Fighting over who has the most vowels in their name.
That's right. Although I will also say, you mentioned, like, it's the 90s, of course it's clones. But I appreciated the fact that Zahn was like, they mentioned this idea of the Clone Wars offhand in, like, A New Hope. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, play with that idea a little bit. Because, again, this is before the prequels, before we saw the Clone Wars. So him being able to pick up, one obscure little line, every fan watching that first Star Wars movie when Luke says he fought with my father, or Kenobi says I fought with your father in the Clone Wars. Everybody in the theater watching that movie for the first time, like, do what now? The what? Please tell me more. So the fact that Zahn picked up on that and played around with it a little bit, I thought was really cool. Alrighty, folks, there you have it. That's our big talk. We finally survived another homework assignment. We're going to have to put our heads together and see what our next homework assignment is going to be. Maybe something a little shorter for Kris. I think I overloaded him just a bit this time. But we are very curious to hear your take on both Hoxpox and the Heir to the Empire trilogy. So find us on social media on Instagram and Twitter at NerdByword, or individually at ThatNerdDave and at ThatNerdChris. We would love to hear your thoughts. And after a short break, we're going to be back with some nerd commendations, so stick around.
And just like that, I've been usurped as the MC of this episode.
Yes! The usurper! I've taken over. I'm not actually Dave. I'm Dave, the clone.
And I am Kris. Kris, yeah.
All right. You take it away, my man.
Well, That was something, but now we're back for our final segment. Dave, you are really playing fast and loose with the rules here. A Geoff Johns book.
Okay, look, I have my reasoning here, and that all comes back down to Black Adam. You remember a few weeks ago when you and I reviewed Black Adam, and I said to you that the movie was fine, but from a JSA perspective, it just made me feel a little icky, because the JSA was basically like diminished. It didn't feel like the organization it should be. Well, it put me in the mood for some JSA books. So I started with some, Golden Age stuff, because the JSA is the original superhero team at DC. It predates the Justice League. And there's some really fun, old books, and you have some really fun characters that are not, as big. You get some Hawkman, but you also get some Spectre. You get the original Flash, Jay Garrick. You get Alan Scott, Green Lantern. And then I wanted to take it a little bit more in the modern age. And I remember that a few years after 0 Hour, which is one of those big DC Comics crossovers designed to fix some continuity, we actually got a new JSA book. And it was launched, I believe, by Robinson, who also wrote the new Starman series back in the time, which still stands as like one of the great DC comic books ever. Like Robinson on Starman is like totally worth the price of admission. But after 6 or 8 issues, suddenly there's 2 names popping up on the book that you probably know. One of them is Geoff Johns, and the other one is David Goyer. And Goyer kind of wanders in and out of the book as a co-writer. And Johns has a pretty long run on this book, going, I think, to issue 75 or something. And then the book continues with another writer for a handful of issues before being canceled. And then it's relaunched a few years later in the wake of the 52, not the new 52, but 52, the actual 52-week comic book series. And it is again written by Geoff Johns for the first 25 or 26 issues before somebody else takes over again. And although the book is good under these other hands, as much as it pains me to say, because Johns has become a very divisive figure, I think this is some of his best comic book writing work. There is a real love for these characters that is present throughout. And it also has the much more superior take on, the Justice Society tangling with Black Adam and him becoming sort of a member and having to work with them and becoming an antagonist and having to work against them. That is right here and is much, much better. It's called Black Rain and is a much superior book. But I also like sort of the mission statement here, which is that the JSA here acknowledges the history of the characters and says, look, these are old men. Alan Scott is an old man, Jay Garrick's an old man, but they're there working with younger heroes, and their goal is, number one, to take the legacies of people that they knew in the past under their wing, which is why you have Black Canary there for a long time, because in DC Comics lore, she's actually the second Black Canary, and the original Black Canary was part of the Justice Society. But also, as the book progresses, the idea of making better heroes, of taking heroes under their wing, of instilling to them morality and values, and making sure that they're not running around killing people left and right. And so that mission statement and the experience going back to World War II on the book, those sorts of things make it really distinct from something like Justice League, in that it feels much more like sort of a family than necessarily a superhero team. They are headquartered in this brownstone. They have rooms there where some of the younger heroes actually live there while they're learning. You have what is probably Geoff Johns' greatest creation. Courtney Whitmore, Stargirl, is on the team. You get legacies for some very, very interesting characters, like the Golden Age Adam, You get a legacy for Our Man, actually a couple of different ones as the book progresses. You get a legacy for Wildcat. You get really sort of a history lesson for like Golden Age characters from DC, and at the same time you get new and interesting twists and takes on those. Dr. Midnight in particular is a real standout in the book. Mr. Terrific, I think you would adore Mr. Terrific, Kris. I think he is so far up your alley. I think he would instantly become like your favorite DC Comics character. I think he's like right there, man, and you just need to get to know him, seriously. So believe it or not, although Johns has become, a very controversial, difficult to deal with sort of character, this book shines incredibly. The relaunch, Justice Society of America, also does something incredible. It brings on Alex Ross as a co-writer, co-plotter, and they basically do sort of a sequel slash in-between slash continue. It's very, very complex, but like a multiversal sequel to Kingdom Come. And if you've never read Kingdom Come, it's probably one of the most standout DC comic stories of all time. And so seeing, that version of Superman appear, and how he deals with the events of Kingdom Come and everything is absolutely chef's kiss. We get several gorgeous new pages of Alex Ross art in there. He also does the covers, which, are absolutely mind-blowingly beautiful. There's just so much good stuff. Jakeem Thunder is another character I think you would really like. He's just really, really cool in this. There's just so many characters that come through the Justice Society that you probably wouldn't be familiar with as a fan of like modern DC Comics. And I think it's totally worth, sticking your nose into this classic sort of Justice Society, this old school approach to heroism. And these very old-fashioned characters bumping up with new legacies of the people that they knew when they were young. There's just so much to love here, and it's probably one of my all-time favorite team books coming out of DC Comics. I think, to me, Johns' Justice Society is almost up there, in a very different way, but almost up there with Morrison's JLA. It's just that good of a team book. So if you're interested in more Black Adam, if you're interested in legacies of Golden Age heroes, this is the book. It's absolutely worth sitting down and reading.
Hokey Pete's. Wow, that's high praise. You know what? You just reminded me that I haven't read Kingdom Come yet. So I think that's the first thing on my to-do list based off of this. But Golden Age comics is really an era, a medium that I haven't really touched at all. So I'm definitely intrigued on checking this one out.
Oh, and this is also where you get Cyclone.
Oh.
She was created for the relaunch, Justice Society of America, when Johns came back and wrote another run on it. She was one of the new characters introduced there, and she's a lot of fun too. So, yeah, it's loaded with good characters, man. All right, so what is your nerd commendation this week, Kris?
Well, a team book with characters that I think you'll love. I'm talking about Strange Academy. It is written by Skottie Young with art by Humberto Ramos, who's one of my all-time favorite artists, particularly for his work on Spider-Man. I love that cartoony style brought to life, and it's perfect for the aesthetic of this book. So Strange Academy is a magical school set in New Orleans, founded by Dr. Stephen Strange. And, from the onset, of course, you're looking at this like, isn't this Hogwarts? This is so much more than that. This is so much more inventive, so much more creative. It's not created by a gigantic transphobe. And it's really just like a diverse cast of what it means to be a magic wielding character. You've got twin brothers from Asgard in Alvi and Eric Brorson. You've got Herman Aguilar, who is from Mexico and has like spiritual powers that like are evocative of like Aztec mythology. He has like these astral projections of jaguars. It's super cool. You have Toth, who's from Weird World, and who's basically made up of crystals, like his whole body, and he cannot speak. You've got Doyle Dormammu, who's the son of Dormammu, the Dread Dormammu, and he has to deal with that legacy. And everybody, treating him as the child of one of the biggest adversaries in the Marvel Universe. Zoe Laveau, who's probably my favorite character, she is revealed to be a zombie, and she has this amulet that helps her maintain this like human form, is really fascinating. And then you have Emily Bright as the main protagonist, who's kind of meh, but she kind of like has this like uprising, and it's really fascinating, and really has some great characters from the magical Marvel universe as like instructors. You've got Dr. Voodoo Jericho Drum as like basically the headmaster. You've got Ilyana Rasputina Magic from the X-Men books as one of the instructors. You've got Wanda Maximoff as an instructor, and so it's just like this really kind of fun coming of age book. I got some definite vibes of like that It Chapter 1 of like these kids getting into stuff that they shouldn't be, goofing around, playing with magic. The entire idea of like magic having a cost is in play here. And so it was just a really, really fun book. I believe it's 18 issues. There is a follow-up series, Strange Academy Finals, that I have not touched on yet, but I really, really enjoyed this series. And like just like the really imaginative, like what is it, what can you play with, like that property that shall not be named is just like mostly white kids in Britain, that are human, and anything that's seen as other is kind of like bad and awful. But like you have one of the kids here is a frost giant, and like that's so freaking cool. And like so I really, really dug this book, and I know that Zoe has popped up in the Midnight Suns book, which I'm going to be reading based on how much I absolutely loved that game. And so I'm really, really excited to see not only like this book to continue, but also to see these characters like introduced into the magical universe. And quite honestly, I'm interested in reading more magical Marvel books now.
Yeah, I'm here for this. I'm going to go ahead and put that on my list. I'm sure this is on what you call it, Unlimited, right?
Yeah, Marvel Unlimited, all 18 issues of the first series. Yep.
So this should be that's really an easy sell for me then, because I can jump in and check it out. I always like books that focus a little bit more on obscure characters, because they're not so beholden to continuity, and not so beholden to like fan expectations. You can play around with them a little more without having a huge backlash. So I'm very interested in checking this one out. I'm here for this.
All right, that wraps up another episode of the Nerd Byword. We thank you so much for riding along with us. Be sure to like and subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Amazon, Spotify, so many others, and nerdbyword.com.
And of course, find us on social media, where we want to hear your thoughts on all this. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at NerdByWord, and individually at @NerdDave and at @NerdChris.
And be sure to hit up the link in all of our socials for our Discord server, for cool merch. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez, with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.